My name is Peter Berley, and I'm here to teach you how to make your very own sauerkraut, which is a super simple project, practically fail-proof, and I'm going to teach you how easy it is to do. So basically, to make sauerkraut, all you need is some good cabbage and salt. That's all you need. Then for equipment, you need a container to put the cabbage in. It could be anything from a jar like this, a wide mouth, preferably wide mouth mason jar, or something that's a little bit fancier. This is a 1/2 gallon or 2 quart mason jar that has a lid with an airlock system. You put a little water in here, it lets the gases escape, but no air can get in. If you really want to get into it a little bit further, you can get yourself something like a crock, okay? And these crocks work great too, if you want something for a larger amount of sauerkraut. But at its most basic, you could do it in a simple mason jar. So, let me just show you how to do this. The cabbage can be chopped or it can be shredded. You could do this in a food processor with a slicer disc. I don't recommend using a shredder disc for this, but you could use it on a slicing, or you could use a manual. I happen to prefer a manual method, something like this, which is an El Cheapo Benrider. Probably costs about 10 bucks, 15 bucks. Or you can use something a little bit fancier, more sturdy, which is a mandolin. Other than that, if you want to just use a knife, that'll work well as well. So here I have my cabbage, and the important thing is that you remove a bit of the core. So I like to cut my cabbage into quarters, and just using a knife, cut away the core. And once you've got your cabbage prepped, you need to weigh it. So after the cores are out, weigh your cabbage, and basically the ratio is 6 grams of salt per pound of cabbage. 6 grams of salt is about 2 teaspoons of kosher salt. I'm using kosher salt, I have a teaspoon measure, so it's roughly a little bit over a generous teaspoon per, 2 generous teaspoons per pound of cabbage. So weigh your cabbage, that's important. You can use a scale like this. Any kind of a scale will do. Now the finer you shred the cabbage, the faster it ferments. Basically, cabbage has all the bacteria it needs to create lactic acid. Bacteria that produces lactic acid by digesting the substrate of the cabbage. The lactic acid is what sours the cabbage, and it's what preserves the cabbage. The way in which you prevent the cabbage from rotting, as opposed to fermenting into something delicious, is the use of salt. Salt controls fermentation, and it prevents putrefaction or rotting of the cabbage. If you were simply to chop up your cabbage and leave it in a bowl or in a container like this, it would sort of start to compost itself or become stinky and nothing that you would want to eat. But if you add salt, the salt will control the fermentation, and what it does is it allows the lactic acid to proliferate, which will crowd out putrefying bacteria. So that's the whole deal really with sauerkraut. The salt controls the rate of bacterial growth so that the lactic acid is able to take over. Once the lactic acid reaches a certain degree, it preserves the cabbage. And that takes generally 7 to 10 days at room temperature. So I'm going to shred some cabbage. You can see that it's pretty fine. It's a really nice shred. I'm going to take a break for a moment, shred the rest of it, and then return with the salting technique. Okay, so now that you've gotten your cabbage shredded, and this is 2 pounds of shredded cabbage. Now you apply the salt, and like I said, it's 2 generous teaspoons per pound of cabbage. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to be very specific to say kosher salt in this case. And that's because different kinds of salt have different size flakes or crystals, and the finer the salt, the more you'll get into a teaspoon. So I find that kosher salt is very, very consistent. It has no additives, and it has a good flavor. It's not expensive, and it's very, very consistent in terms of a teaspoon will be 2 grams. Okay? A tablespoon will be 10. So that's why I like to use it. In addition to this, you can add a flavoring if you like. Traditionally, people have used everything from juniper to cumin. Horseradish can go into it. Mustard seeds can go in. I like caraway. That's another very traditional flavoring. Not too much. Maybe a teaspoon or 2 of caraway would be enough for this. And 2 pounds, I find 2 pounds of cabbage will fill a 1-quart mason jar. So I like to use my hands. And one of the benefits of using your hands is that you start to develop a good, healthy bacteria in your skin. Your microbiome is fed by the bacteria that's in cabbage. And this is organic cabbage, so this is good stuff. Same thing goes for making sourdough bread. When you knead by hand, you reap an extra benefit by feeding the microbiome in your skin. Internally, of course, things that are lacto-fermented, naturally fermented from the bacteria that exists in the plants, such as sauerkraut or sourdough bread, are excellent for healing your gut and for, in general, helping your immune system. Now, if you don't want to work quite as hard as I am right now, an alternative is just to mix your cabbage with salt and set it aside for an hour or so. The salt will start to do the action of releasing the juices from the kraut without you doing any work. The idea here is you want to crush the cabbage to the point where it starts to exude some juice. So now you can see the juice is starting to come out. And that's looking pretty good. You can see this nice and juicy. Other considerations. One thing about cabbage is that the optimal cabbages for making sauerkraut are cabbages that are tender. They tend to be lighter for their size. They're not as dense. The really heavy storage cabbages don't have much water in them, and the fiber of the cabbage is much stronger and tougher and more difficult to break down. So a cabbage that can really exude juice like this is what you want. And I'm just going to get something to press it down with. So a rolling pin's a good thing. The idea here is you want to press the cabbage down so the juice rises above it. Above the level of the cabbage. Like so. that's a little bit full. So I'll take a little bit of the cabbage out. You want it to be kind of at the shoulder. Okay, that's good. Now with this kind of a mason jar, definitely a metal lid is best. And what's important though is that you do not over tighten it. So you just want it to be just 2 fingers firm. Leave it a little loose. And that's because as fermentation begins, pressure is going to build. Gases are going to develop and it's going to put pressure on the lid, and you don't want your jar exploding on you. So just keep it loose. And I would say the best thing to do is to put it on something because it's going to weep. The first 3 days are the most active time for fermentation. So in 3 days, you're going to get a lot of sort of carbonation going, a lot of gases rising, and it's going to cause some pressure and it's going to cause some weeping. So some of the juice is going to overflow a little bit. So put this on a plate or anything to catch the juices. And that's really all you need to do. That's it. This is a kraut that I made 10 days ago. You can notice the difference in color. It was from the same cabbage. This is green and this is now sort of an olive drab. That's because that's evidence of lactic acid. The acid is what changes the color. It's like if you cook some broccoli and you put some lemon or vinegar on it, it will turn it brown. It's the same action that's happening here. The acid that is developed in the pickling process will discolor the cabbage, and that's a good sign. So this is my finished product. This is the raw kraut. I would say 7 to 10 days at room temperature, and you'll be fine. You'll be good to go. After that, refrigerate it, and it will continue to improve. It will keep in your refrigerator for 6 to 8 months. So that's all there is to sauerkraut. If you're interested in more information about kraut or have any questions, you can reach me at berley.p@gmail.com. That's berley.p@gmail.com, or you can visit my website, peterberley.com. Thanks for watching.